Crypto is regulated. Some people see it as a wild west. Initially, in the beginning, I'd say, well, I'm not gonna say, well, in the beginning of 2017, it was not as regulated, and even up until now, it was a lot less regulated. It's been a lot less regulated, and government entities, central entities are trying to understand how to better regulate it because it's so, even though it's been around for years, it's still new, if that makes sense. Still fresh for a lot of people because it hasn't reached the point of mainstream adoption yet. So the goal of this session is to understand that cryptocurrencies and their adjacent firms are already regulated in most developed countries and economies. And we're going to develop a basic understanding of potential regulatory exposure in three significant areas of regulator concern and enforcement action, which is taxation, money service, business, and securities legislation. General overview. So cryptocurrencies are heavily regulated in many jurisdictions, such as tax law, banking and money transmitting regulation, securities regulation, criminal and civil law, consumer protection laws, pension retirement plan regulation, and commodities regulation. So many regulatory agencies assert regulatory authorities over cryptocurrencies, but because they do not easily fit into like one specific category, it's easy for each agency to see them differently, and sometimes the light that they're viewed in is contradictory of the other one. Regulators have multiple areas of concern, such as anti-money laundering, investor protection, tax compliance, capital currency controls where applicable, market competition and efficiency, insider trading, consumer protection, fraud and theft, and cybercrime, illegal product sales, ransom, kidnapping, extortion, data ransom. Roughly, the regulatory environment is most favorable in developed economies. So, cryptocurrency and crypto assets are generally treated as property. This is a general principle it underlies most national approaches, namely that cryptocurrency is treated as property and not currency. And why is that? Many nation states have regulations that explicitly define currency as legal tender of another nation state, preventing them from recognizing other currencies formally as currency. So this policy is, broadly speaking, sensible. So Bitcoin might behave as a currency, but should a country extend the same treatment to every other cryptocurrency? There's so many that pop up all the time. That's the question that's really in the air. Would we apply these same regulations to any other cryptocurrency that pops up as we would to Bitcoin, even though it behaves as a currency? And if so, should the same treatment apply to all other forms of currency, such as in-game credits and frequent flyer miles? The exception to this approach are countries like Germany that allow for the concept of a unit of account for tax and trading purposes that can be treated as a form of private money used in multilateral clearing circles. So the session goal right here is to highlight some of the key areas of regulatory interest, and the objective is not to cover any of the regulatory areas in detail, but to keep everything high level. As far as taxation goes, we all know, as the man Benjamin Franklin said, in this world nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. So we will use the IRS, the USA framework for taxation, and we're going to use it as a case study. So this framework is relatively well developed, and it has high overlaps with their approach with most industrialized nations. And we generally ignore low tax jurisdictions because they tend to have very low or no taxes on a wide range of activities and are extending similar treatments to cryptocurrencies. The core IRS decision is to treat cryptocurrency as property. The IRS treats cryptocurrency as property, which means it is taxed in a similar manner to stocks, bonds, real estate, art, and so on. Due to this treatment, cryptocurrency qualifies for capital gains tax treatment, and capital gains tax rates are lower than ordinary income or salary tax rates. Tax is paid at the time of sale in the event that there was a profit on the sale, so if the price has risen since the purchase. So if you bought it at X and the price went up and you sold it, there is a capital gains tax on it. So tax is due whether the sale is for fiat or other cryptocurrency. From an investment perspective, it's a sensible treatment. It creates a serious practical problem when using cryptocurrencies for day-to-day transactions, because it means that every time a purchase is made with a cryptocurrency, it is technically a sale of cryptocurrency. So if you were to go buy some crypto or buy some coffee with crypto, it is technically a sale and you would have to pay tax on it. I mean, strictly speaking, every time someone buys a coffee with Bitcoin, they should calculate the purchase price of that fraction of a Bitcoin they use in the current price of Bitcoin, and they have to report a capital gains or capital loss. That is taxable. And it's a hindrance for everyday transactions, even small transactions especially. So with one exception, the taxation approaches for other matters are as expected. Income received in cryptocurrency is treated as ordinary income. Salary paid in cryptocurrencies are subject to the typical payroll social charges. Mining companies that mine cryptocurrency and pay out a cryptocurrency for the miners, their taxes operating businesses with revenue and expenses. And the most controversial aspect the current IRS tax treatment is the treatment of hard forks, which is when a blockchain splits. So in the event of a hard fork, if the user has been given access to the token of the new chain, it is taxable at that time, at that price of that time, at ordinary income rates. Really, that's the weeds of getting into everything. Like you have to know the basics before you start getting into hard forks and things like that. So when a blockchain splits into another, such as when Bitcoin had a split and it hard forked and there was Litecoin created. It created its own coin, which is Litecoin, LTC. So most countries are taking a similar direction to the United States in terms of taxation, meaning they have the European Union has stated that the VAT, it does not apply to the purchase of cryptocurrencies with fiat, which is sensible. A few countries, they have small personal exemptions from taxation for gains and losses in crypto, exempt to small retail transactions. And on the whole, actually, tax policy towards cryptocurrency, it's settling down. And the expectation is that gains should be taxable. That's just the expectation worldwide, generally, for developed countries at least. MSBs, money service businesses. So they're a group of non-bank financial institutions, such as currency dealers, exchangers, check cashers, issuers of traveler's checks, money orders or stored value cards, sellers, redeemers of traveler's checks, money orders or stored value cards, money transmitters, and the U.S. Postal Service. So those are all MSBs, money service businesses. Once a firm is classified as an MSB, you're triggered a wide range of regulatory requirements in the U.S., such as having to register with the Department of the Treasury, developing the customer identification, know your customer, KYC, and AML is anti-money laundering program, with policies, procedures, internal controls, compliance officers, and the independent revenue review. Reporting cash or suspicious transactions under the Bank Secrecy Act. State level registrations, almost all states require registrations or licensing for MSBs that operate in their state, and in some cases that transact with citizens of their state, even if they don't have operations in the state. Why do we care about MSBs? So that our cryptocurrency business is not classified as an NBS without us realizing it, because then we could end up in jail. So FinCEN has clarified which firms are MSBs. So FinCEN, FINCEN, is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's the Bureau of the U.S. Department of Treasury and is tasked with fighting financial crimes. So it has made 2 public rulings regarding virtual currency, clarifying which parties in the digital currency ecosystem are MSBs, and therefore they're subject to regulation. So consumers, the buyers, are not MSBs. A user who obtains convertible virtual currency and uses it to purchase real or virtual goods or services is not an MSB. Miners, so long as they are mining for their own account, are not MSBs. If they are mining in order to transmit money from others to third parties, then they would be an MSB. So exchanges are MSBs, and if they allow transmissions of value to third parties in the Bitcoin ecosystem, that would mean that firms like Coinbase, one of the largest, is an MSB. So it was not obvious at first to crypto firms that they might be MSBs, as we said before, because this area was just so new. Even though people have been in it since about 2007, it's still relatively new and people are trying to understand it. There are legal penalties for violating MSB regulations, even unknowingly, at very severe, and can include heavy fines and jail time. So prior centralized digital currency firms such as eGold and Liberty Reserve. They were indicted and closed for failing to register as money transmitters, among other charges. And several early Bitcoin exchanges, such as Mt. Gox in May 2013 and BitInstant in January 2014, they were afoul of MSB regulations, and along with individuals exchanging crypto with others on an individual basis, which allowed them to be indicted and closed. So MSB compliance is expensive and time consuming, which is why taxation on cryptocurrencies and actually going through all the regulations to be compliant is it's a lengthy process. And now there's an easier approach now for people working to become MSBs. But previously, I would say 2007 to about 2018, it was not as easy. New York's BIT license has a similar scope at the state level. So the BIT license is a business license issued by the New York State Department of Financial Services to those conducting business in the state of New York and certain segments of virtual currency. It is considered the most onerous state license of its kind in the United States, and licensure is required if a company's business activity involves receiving virtual currency for transmission or transmitting virtual currency, unless for non-financial purposes, storing, holding, or maintaining custody or control of virtual currencies on behalf of others, buying and selling virtual currency as a customer business, performing exchange services as a customer business, and controlling, administering, or issuing a virtual currency. FATF, Financial Action Task Force, issued guidance in summer 2019 at the national state level for virtual currency. So it is an intergovernmental organization. It has 39 member states, and they're focused on money laundering and terrorist financing. And most developed nations are members of the FATF. So they're used by these states for harmonization of anti-money laundering approaches. And though the details are beyond the scope of this course, last summer, they issued guidance for its member states on the AML harmonization for virtual assets. They're putting a lot of systems in place to protect against money laundering and all the other things that we need as far as taxation purposes and regulatory stances. That part. Ooh. So SEC, their statement on DeFi, if you don't know what DeFi is, decentralized finance, on DeFi risk, regulations, opportunities in November 2021. So on November 9th, 2021, the Securities and Exchange Commissioner, Carolyn A. Crenshaw, issued a statement covering the following key areas. Decentralized finance presents a panoply of opportunities. However, it also poses important risks and challenges for regulators, investors, and financial markets. Fundamentally, DeFi is about investing, which includes speculative risks taken in pursuit of passive profits from hope for token price appreciation, or investments seeking a return in exchange for placing capital at risk or locking it up for another's benefit. Crenshaw questioned the very nature of DeFi, calling its lack of transparency and pseudonymity structural hurdles that are bound to hold the market's development back until appropriate investor safeguards are put in place. Crenshaw argues that without a common set of conduct, expectations, and a functional system to enforce those principles, markets tend toward corruption, marked by fraud, self-dealing, cartel-like activity, and information asymmetries, which is kind of true, because with a sense of anonymity, whereas you don't have to reveal yourself or verify any of your details when you're using decentralized finance, anyone with a wallet can just hop on, sign up, and start sending and receiving money, pooling money, taking out loans on money, borrowing money, all those things without having to reveal who you are personally. It's subject to mistreatment. And it's an interesting area, and it's probably why a lot of criminals gravitate towards it. It's one of the reasons why criminals gravitate towards it, because of the anonymity. All you need is a wallet, and you're able to use it at your leisure. There's a lot of countries that are working on different regulatory systems to manage these types of things. But I mean, it's Pandora's box, honestly. Yeah, honestly, it's Pandora's box. So securities regulation applies to ICOs, STOs, IEOs in all formats. ICO is an initial coin offering. An STO is a security token offering. And an IEO is an initial exchange offering. So the regulatory analysis is the same on all fronts, and they have to pass the Howey test to be classified as an investment contract or classified as a security. So the Howey test, it classifies the transaction as an investment contract if there's an investment of money in a common enterprise with a reasonable expectation of profits from the efforts of others. So with securities regulation being the first prong, we could say with an ICO, almost every ICO meets this test, as ICOs are typically fundraising tools for the team working on a certain project. So in the first prong of the Howey test, they pass. Is there a common enterprise? So that one is a bit more controversial, but given that most ICOs have been launched by a centralized and identifiable promoter, the SEC has taken the position that this prong holds. So that's 2 out of 3 so far for the Howey test in order to determine whether they're investment contracts and or securities. Prong 3A, is there a reasonable expectation of profit? Almost all ICOs, initial coin offerings, sold their tokens explicitly or implicitly with the expectation that the buyer would receive capital appreciation from the efforts of others. So the guidance is quite extensive on this point, but it's fair to characterize it as follows. If a team is issuing a coin, in order for that team to build out a crypto asset network, and they are substantially in charge of that development, it is likely to meet this test. Upon passing every ledger of the Howey test, it is classified as an investment contract or a security. The emerging typical European 3-part classification framework are conceptually similar, and they can be matched back to the Howey test. There are payment tokens, there are utility tokens, and there are security tokens. So almost all token offerings of the last cycle were probably securities. That's just how it is. Most people, when they're investing in any of these things and when they're released, they're expected to have capital appreciation. So people see them as investments that have the potential to rise in value. Okay? That's why they're generally investing in these things, which means upon passing all the other parts of the Howey test, they're subject to being considered an investment contract or security. So to sum it up, handling regulatory issues is going to be critical for the crypto asset business. The financial services industry is a very highly regulated industry, and it is normal to expect that corporate entities in the digital currency, crypto asset space will be equally heavily regulated. Decentralized digital currencies share characteristics of currency, property, commodities, and money transmission networks. And this creates challenges in neatly matching them to pre-existing regulatory categories. In some countries, this has meant that every regulatory asserts authorities over the space. Taxation policy appears to be coalescing around treating crypto assets as property. And there's a heavy regulatory focus on AML, anti-money laundering, so businesses have to take extra attention if there is a potential for them to be classified as an MSB, a money service business. Most token offerings will be classified as securities offerings under existing laws, so any token offerings have to be carefully evaluated with security lawyers. And this is a rapidly developing and exciting space. If you're not sure if the activity you're participating in this space is legal or falls under the jurisdiction of being a security, as per the Howey test, then you should reach out to your lawyer. That's going to sum it up for today's lesson. This is a very rapidly evolving industry, and as I always say, it's cutting edge. It's relatively new. It's new for those who have never heard of it or who haven't dived into it. But it's worth viewing. It's worth getting to, if not diving into the weeds, at least getting a general overview of what it is and how it works. It'll pay dividends in the future. That is all for this call, this class. Thank everyone for joining. Until next time.